The 19th century, a period spanning from 1800 to 1899, was a time of monumental change, an era that reshaped societies, economies, and the very fabric of human life across the globe. It was a century marked by revolutions, industrial, political, and social, that laid the groundwork for the modern world we inhabit today. Imagine, if you will, a world largely powered by muscle, wind, and water at the dawn of the century. Most people lived in rural areas tied to the rhythms of agricultural life. But beneath this seemingly unchanging surface, a quiet revolution was already brewing in Great Britain, the Industrial Revolution. This wasn't a sudden explosion, but a gradual yet profound shift from hand production methods to machine production, characterized by the use of new energy sources like steam and the factory system. Suddenly, goods that had taken weeks or months to produce by hand could be churned out in days or even hours. This led to an unprecedented increase in production, making goods more accessible, but also giving rise to entirely new social classes and urban centers. Think of the grimy, bustling streets of burgeoning factory towns like Manchester, where smoke billowed from countless chimneys and the air thrummed with the sound of machinery. The widespread adoption of steam power, particularly with the invention of the practical steam engine by James Watt in the late 18th century, was a true game changer. This wasn't just for factories, it revolutionized transportation. Imagine the marvel of the first steam locomotives chugging across the landscape, connecting distant towns and cities faster than ever before. Roads, once the primary arteries of commerce, began to be complemented by a rapidly expanding network of railways. This also applied to the seas, which, with steamships gradually replacing sailing vessels, making international trade and travel more reliable and quicker. For the average person, this meant a world that was suddenly shrinking, with goods and ideas traveling with unprecedented speed. Politically, the 19th century opened in the shadow of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon Bonaparte, a figure of immense ambition and military genius, sought to redraw the map of Europe. His campaigns, though ultimately leading to his defeat, profoundly impacted the political landscape, spreading revolutionary ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity, while also fostering a sense of nationalism across the continent. This concept of nationalism, the idea that people sharing a common language, culture, and history should form their own independent nation-state, became a powerful force throughout the century, leading to the unification of countries like Germany and Italy. Think of the passionate speeches and often bloody conflicts as various peoples sought self-determination. Across the Atlantic, the United States was rapidly expanding, embarking on its own journey of nation building. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803, a massive land deal with France, effectively doubled the size of the young nation, setting the stage for westward expansion. This expansion, while celebrated by many, came at a terrible cost for indigenous populations who were displaced and dispossessed of their ancestral lands through a series of treaties and often violent conflicts. Meanwhile, the dark stain of slavery continued to persist, leading to deep divisions that would eventually erupt in the American Civil War from 1861 to 1865. This brutal conflict, fought over the fundamental issue of human bondage, ultimately led to the abolition of slavery, marking a pivotal moment in American history and a profound step towards greater human rights. Beyond the major power players, other regions of the world were also undergoing significant transformations. In Asia, the Opium Wars in China, primarily with Great Britain, highlighted the growing power of European imperial ambitions and forced China to open its markets to foreign trade. This period saw the rise of global empires, with European powers carving out vast colonial territories in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. This scramble for colonies, often driven by economic motives like access to raw materials and new markets, led to the imposition of foreign rule, the exploitation of resources, and the disruption of local cultures and societies. Culturally and intellectually, the 19th century was a vibrant period. The Romanticism, an artistic and literary movement, emphasized emotion, individualism, and the glorification of nature, a reaction against the cold rationality of the Enlightenment. Think of the dramatic landscapes painted by artists like J.M.W. Turner, or the passionate verses of poets like Lord Byron. Later in the century, realism emerged, seeking to depict life as it truly was, often focusing on the struggles of the working class and the realities of urban life. Think of the detailed novels of Charles Dickens, exposing the social injustices of Victorian England. Science and technology witnessed breathtaking advancements. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by evolution by natural selection, published in his seminal work on the origin of species in 1859, fundamentally altered our understanding of life on Earth, challenging long-held beliefs. The development of electricity, while still in its nascent stages, laid the groundwork for future technological marvels. Imagine the flickering gas lights giving way to the promise of electric illumination by the end of the century. Medicine, too, saw significant progress with the development of germ theory by Louis Pasteur and the development of Robert Koch. Theory by Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch, leading a better understanding of disease and the development of vaccines, dramatically improving public health. Socially, the 19th century witnessed the rise of new ideologies and movements. Socialism, in various forms, emerged as a response to the inequalities created by industrial capitalism, advocating for greater economic equality and social justice. Labor movements gained momentum as workers organized to demand better wages, safer working conditions, and shorter hours. Think of the early trade unions and the often hard-fought battles for basic worker rights. Women too began to assert their voices, campaigning for greater rights, including access to education and the right to vote, laying the groundwork for the suffragette movements of the early 20th century. As the century drew to a close, the world was a vastly different place than it had been in 1800. Empires had risen and fallen, new nations had been born, and technology had transformed daily life in unimaginable ways. The seeds of the 20th century, with its world wars, technological explosions, and continued social struggles, had firmly been sown in the tumultuous and transformative years of 1800s. It was truly a century where the old order gave way to the new, a period of relentless change that forever altered the course of human history. Now, the 20th century, a period stretching from 1900 to 1999, was an epoch of unprecedented change, a relentless acceleration of progress and conflict that reshaped every facet of human existence at a dizzying pace. If the 19th century laid the groundwork, the 20th century saw the full blossoming and sometimes the catastrophic wild wilting of those seeds. At the turn of the century, much of the world was still dominated by vast empires. The British Empire, for instance, covered a quarter of the Earth's landmass and governed a fifth of its population. The Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, Russian, and German empires also held significant sway. However, beneath this seemingly stable surface, tensions were simmering. Imperial rivalries, an armed race, and a complex web of alliances created a highly combustible atmosphere in Europe, culminating in the outbreak of the First World War in 1914. This wasn't merely a regional conflict. It quickly escalated into a global conflagration involving trench warfare, chemical weapons, and unprecedented levels of causalities. The war fundamentally altered the global order, leading to the collapse of empires, the redrawing of national borders, and the rise of new political ideologies. The aftermath of World War I saw the rise of the United States as a major global power and the establishment of the League of Nations, an ambitious attempt at international cooperation to prevent future wars, though it ultimately it proved ineffective. The 1920s, often called the Roaring Twenties, were a period of economic prosperity and cultural innovation in many Western countries, marketed by jazz music, new fashions, and the sense of liberation. However, this boom was abruptly shattered by the Great Depression, which began with the stock market crash of 1929 and plunged the world into an economic crisis of unprecedented scale. Unemployment soared, poverty became widespread, and a sense of desperation gripped millions. This economic turmoil contributed to the rise of totalitarian regimes in the 1930s. In Germany, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party rose to power, propagating an ideology of racial supremacy and aggressive expansionism. In Italy, Benito Mussolini established a fascist dictatorship, and in the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin solidified his brutal communist regime, orchestrating purges and collectivization that led to the death of millions. These aggressive ideologies, coupled with the unresolved issues from the First World War, set the stage for an even more devastating conflict. The Second World War, from 1939 to 1945, was the deadliest conflict in human history, claiming an estimated 70 to 85 million lives. It saw the systematic genocide of 6 million Jews during the Holocaust, the widespread bombing of cities, and the horrific use of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This war fundamentally reshaped global politics, leading to the decline of European empires, the rise of two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, and the beginning of the Cold War. The Cold War, lasting from the late 1940s until the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, was a period of intense ideological rivalry and proxy conflicts between the capitalist West, led by the US, and the communist East, led by the USSR. It was a war fought not with direct military confrontation between the superpowers, but through espionage, an arms race, space exploration, and conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan. The ever-present threat of nuclear annihilation cast a long shadow over the entire period. This era also saw the decolonization movement gain momentum as former colonies in Asia and Africa achieved independence, often after long and difficult struggles. India, for example, gained independence from British rule in 1947, followed by numerous other nations. Technologically, the 20th century was a century of breathtaking innovation. The automobile became ubiquitous, transforming transportation and urban planning. Airplanes evolved from fragile contraptions to supersonic jets, making global travel routine. Radio and television brought news and entertainment directly into homes, fundamentally changing how people consumed information and interacted with the world. The invention of the transistor in 1947 laid the foundation for the digital revolution, leading to computers, the internet, and mobile phones by the end of the century. Imagine the transition from manual typewriters to desktop computers within a single lifetime. Medical science also made astonishing leaps with the discovery of penicillin by Alexander Fleming in 1928, revolutionizing the treatment of bacterial infections, and the development of vaccines eradicating diseases like polio and smallpox. Organ transplantation became a reality, and gene therapy began to be explored. Socially and culturally, the 20th century witnessed profound shifts. Women gained the right to vote in many countries, and movements for civil rights and racial equality gained global prominence, particularly in the United States with the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. Popular culture became a dominant force with Hollywood films, rock and roll music, and later television shaping global trends and youth culture. Environmental awareness began to emerge in the latter half of the century as the impact of industrialization and population growth on the planet became increasingly apparent. The end of the 20th century was marked by the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, signaling the end of the Cold War and the triumph of liberal democracy, at least for a time. The rise of globalization, driven by technological advancements and free market policies, interconnected economies and cultures across the globe more than ever before. However, new challenges also emerged, including global terrorism, climate change, and persistent economic inequalities. In essence, the 20th century was a testament to humanity's capacity for both immense creation and devastating destruction. It was a period where the boundaries of possibility were constantly pushed, for better and for worse, leaving behind a legacy that continues to shape our present and future.